Good evening. It is my honor to welcome Brian Westbrook tonight, along with his wife Marisa and one of their daughters, Bernadette. I myself first actually came to hear about Brian Westbrook from a pastor I was assigned to as a seminarian, and this was back when Brian was still early on. I believe Missouri Coalition for Life had been formed at that point. But this priest was an old Sicilian priest, and he talked about the questions that Brian was asking concerning the pro-life movement, and how systematic and how intentional it was. And he said, he seems like the real deal. Well, Missouri for Coalition for Life had a great success, and as Brian Westbrook has talked about Missouri Coalition for Life, with the change in the landscape with the Dobbs decision recently, they had a decision to make as far as whether they were only going to seek to end abortion in Missouri, or if God had grander plans for them. And the answer is that God has grander or greater plans. So thanks be to God, we have Mr. Westbrook for a great local resource, very knowledgeable, and a very faithful Catholic as well. I think then, before I invite him up to give his kind of address this evening, we'll call to mind that we're in the presence of our Lord. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. O God, who are the author of all life, human, angelic, and divine, we give you thanks for giving us not only the life that we have to live on this earth, but eternal beatitude in heaven also to look forward to. Place in our hearts a great desire and for many souls to be saved and be brought to you through your Son, Jesus Christ. May we consider not only the life of the child, but also of the mother and the father. May we desire not only to preserve from death, but also to bring souls to that life of grace. We ask you to shine your effulgent light and to send your Holy Spirit upon us, and especially upon Brian this evening. Grant unction to his words for the conversion of hearts, for the clarity of teaching. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Now I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Brian Westbrook.
The most successful education approach to the Negro is through a religious appeal. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is a man who can straighten that out, and straighten out the idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. Margaret Sanger, December 19th, 1939. It is no surprise that Margaret Sanger, the founder of the Birth Control League, eventually called Planned Parenthood, her goal with birth control and abortion was to exterminate the Negro population, as she said. As we talk about abortion this evening, let us not forget that it was first and foremost after segregation that they were looking for a way to just exterminate all of the minorities. And for the most part, they've actually been fairly successful. In New York today, more black babies will be aborted in 1 year than will be born. Most of the abortion facilities are in minority areas, and most of their advertising and promotions are in minority areas as well. So who is this Margaret Sanger? Well, Margaret Sanger came from two parents who were Irish Catholics. Her mother, over the course of 22 years, had 18 pregnancies, 11 live births, and Margaret Sanger was the sixth of those 11 siblings. Her mother died at the age of 49, though. Margaret Sanger, for whatever reason, hated large families. She was one of 11 children, and to the day of her death, despised the idea of large families, even as a Catholic. In 1921, Margaret Sanger founded the so-called American Birth Control League. Again, put most of these facilities in minority areas. And her first goal was, in fact, legalization of birth control, which happened in 1968, a year before her death. But she never made it to her ultimate goal, which was legalized abortion in 1973. It was legalized in New York and in some other states, but not across the entire nation until 1973. One of her other quotes she had was, "The most merciful thing that a family does to one of its infant members is to kill it." We wouldn't be sitting here today, this evening, or likely would not be if it wasn't for Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger had many ties to Nazi Germany and many ties to the KKK and many other extremist groups. And so tonight we're going to be talking about language. So how could a woman who founded this extreme organization tied to these other extreme organizations, how was she able to convince the entire American public that first and foremost, birth control is fine and great and amazing, and second of all, that abortion should be used through all 9 months of pregnancy? How was she able to do it? Well, it really brings up some memories of how early in my married years, with my wife now married of 16 years, early on we had many discussions about abortion. I didn't know, but she was raised in a good, strong, pro-life Catholic family, and I was not. And I learned very quickly that whenever the topic of abortion came up, that my ignorant and apathetic position to it just repeated all of the talking points as if it's choice. And it's just between a woman and her doctor. I can't even believe that I said these types of things. But I did. And I knew it was very serious that one evening in our family room, my wife sat there in tears, not believing what I had just said. And many of you have heard the story of my son, who eventually was in the hospital for RSV and pneumonia, but I'm not going to tell that story today. But as I became a father and I realized that we needed to do something to protect innocent life, it was interesting that everyone encouraged me to go out to the abortion facility. And I said, absolutely not. Not that. Anything but that. Can we just help the homeless or help with foster care or adoption or anything else, but not go out to the abortion facility? And I learned that my mother-in-law had had an abortion in her past. And she and my wife, again, asked over and over, would you come out to the abortion facility? And finally I said, yes, sure, I'll go. I'll go to this place. And so we picked a Saturday morning to go. And I decided that Saturday morning we would have a great breakfast. We had bacon and eggs, and we took forever to put all this together and clean up. We had to have the house perfectly clean before we went out to the abortion facility. So needless to say, we showed up on a Saturday afternoon, not a Saturday morning. And we showed up there at the abortion facility, and we were the only ones who were there. just the two of us and our newborn child, Ethan. We were there at that abortion facility, and we had no signs, no literature, no nothing, except for our two hands. We put them together and said a couple of prayers. And yet, as we did that, people started yelling and screaming at us as they drove by in their cars. We kind of looked at each other in confusion and kept on saying a couple of prayers, and then standing there kind of bewildered about this whole thing. And everything changed when a young lady walked out of that abortion facility. And she sat on those steps, on the very top of the steps, and just started crying. I might estimate that she was about 15 years of age and wouldn't stop crying. I watched as a white SUV pulled into that parking lot, sat in front of that abortion facility, and that young lady stumbled down the steps while the car was still running. Obviously, in both physical and emotional pain, I was so distraught about what I was witnessing. No one helped her in the car. No so-called escort helping her out of the abortion facility. They only care that she goes in, but no one cares how they get back to their car and how they go home. She gets into this vehicle, they pull around the parking lot, and they stop right in front of me, in front of us. And I didn't know what was going on, so I dropped to my knees, threw my arms up in the air, and said, God, take care of this little girl, and I'll rededicate my life to you. Of course, she didn't stop crying. She just continued while I suppose her mother or someone else kind of sat there with their arms crossed, giving the nonverbal communication of, well, it's just your fault, get over it. A few moments later, they drive away. I will never see her again, or at least if I do, I'll never know that I'll see her. And at that moment in time, I realized that abortion was real. It wasn't just something abstract. It isn't just something hidden behind language. It was something real that I had seen happen right in front of me. Maybe not the abortion, but of course the after effects. And I needed to do something about it. And of course we got involved in this thing called politics. And in 2008, as you might recall, was the year of Obama. And so every single politician we started to support and get behind, every single one of them kept losing. And we again got discouraged. And that is until we figured out this thing called 40 Days for Life. And we brought 40 Days for Life to St. Louis, my wife, my mother-in-law, and a couple of people up at St. Ferdinand Parish, and we said, why not? We'll go out there for 40 straight days and pray for an end to abortion. It was a huge success, and babies were saved as a result of that. But one of the things I've learned is that the reason that we're even here today is because of semantics. Now, of course, Margaret Sanger is part of that, but also semantics is just a word I never really realized until I got into college, but the word semantic is just the use of words. And semantic noise is one of the things that I learned very clearly. Is that when you just don't know the language, and there's so much noise around the variety of different languages, that this semantic noise can make things so darn confusing. And there's a guy named William Brennan who wrote a great book that talks about semantics, confronting the language, empowering the culture of death. He's actually here from St. Louis. And he talks about semantic gymnastics on page 85 here. And that the abortion industry, all they want to do is to twist the language so that they can continue to kill children. And he says this, the destruction of the Judeo-Christian ethic is required to continue to kill children through abortion. And we must replace the Judeo-Christian ethic with an elitist quality of life ethic. Have you ever heard that before? That somehow the quality of life is so much more important than your Judeo-Christian framework, the things that we love so much. And of course, the dehumanization of the victims of abortion. They're just clumps of cells, they're dangerous diseases, they're infected, they're non-persons, or they're just simply property. He goes on to talk about euphemisms and other things. And that's what I'd like to address today. The pro-abortion movement, those who are promoting abortion every single day, have won the language of the last 50 years. There's only one word that we have claimed and we have fought for more than anything else, and that's the word abortion. I can't go to any restaurant today and utter the word abortion without turning heads. I'm sure none of you would either. I somehow, for whatever reason, have been given the job of saying the word abortion about 500 times every single day. But the word abortion, because of the pro-life movement for 50 plus years, has still been a bad word. And that I'm very thankful for many of you who have stood the line for that one really important thing. That when we utter the word abortion, it is still something negative. I wanted to quote our founding fathers here, and you've heard this before. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You know, it's interesting, our vice president recently just simply skipped past the endowed by our Creator and also skipped the word life. She was quoting to a group of students and just interestingly omitted the words created and creator and the word life. And it's no accident that she did. So what we really want to focus on is not really the life part of this, but instead the creation part of this. So I'm going to start going through a lot of different things here about language, and this is really the pencil and paper time of the evening. So if you brought pencil and paper, please pull that out. I'd like to talk specifically about language related to abortion. If you don't have pencil and paper, sure, I don't mind if you jot things down on your cell phone, send yourself a text. I don't mind those things. That's perfectly fine. And a little bit later, there will be Q&A. I highly encourage question and answers. But this part is really about how are we going to change our behavior so that then we can combat the language that's being used against us every single day. First and foremost, I want to talk about fertilization versus conception. If you've ever prayed for life from conception to natural death, anyone ever prayed for life from conception to natural death? Of course, this is participation now, right? Of course we have. Right now, at this very moment, the other side is trying to redefine the word conception. The word conception that they want it to mean is either at the moment of implantation or even later. So we must use a scientific term of fertilization. Fertilization in a scientific world is the moment when sperm and egg join together. Science realizes this, and we must use the word fertilization because the other side, their talking points is that conception is a religious term, and that fertilization is really when basically what they want to define as not something human. And so if our laws and our prayers and everything we talk about is conception, they're trying to define that as something different than fertilization. So let's think of some interesting times that might be used, of course, is if we pass a law that says we say that abortion is no longer viable, or we can't have abortion at the moment of conception. Of course, they want to have abortion before, quote, implantation, or before whatever they define as being conception. So let's think of one time. What about frozen embryos? Frozen embryos have been fertilized, although we don't agree on how that they've been created, but we do believe that they are wholly human. But they would say that somehow they haven't been conceived, and so they don't have human rights. Let's talk about preborn versus unborn. When we think of the word unborn, we're very excited about the fact that we want to protect the unborn. We want to fight for the unborn. And we've seen this on every single sign that every pro-life individual for all of the pro-life movement's history, that we want to protect the unborn child. But anyone ever gone to unschool? No, instead we go to preschool. We don't unprepare, we prepare, or we don't unpair, we prepare for our talk. Hopefully I do halfway decent, right? We prepare for things and we are pre-born, we're before birth. If you are on something, that means that you are not something, right? So the child in the womb is not lacking anything, they just need time to develop. And so that child is not unborn, that child is preborn, or just simply the child in the womb. Let's talk about pregnancy help centers versus pregnancy crisis centers. And this I think we do a fairly good job with in the pro-life movement, but I think it's good for us to remind ourselves that the crisis she is in is not the pregnancy itself. It is not a crisis pregnancy, it's an untimely or unexpected pregnancy. And she's not going to have a crisis pregnancy help center. She's not going to a crisis pregnancy help center. She's going to a pregnancy resource center or a pregnancy help center. Let's talk about something a little bit more sensitive, and I think that's someone who is post-abortive. Ever heard this terminology before? We talk about women who have gone through an abortion experience. We should say just that. Let's say we get our wisdom teeth pulled out. I'm not post-wisdom teeth, am I? No, I just tell them that I had my wisdom teeth taken out. I think what really, really happens, I think we have a lot of challenges and problems when we talk about women who have had abortion, and of course, men who have experienced abortion as well. Those fathers, those grandfathers, those who pressured or pushed them into an abortion. That we need to respect where they are and their dignity. It is not something that they own for the rest of their lives. It's something that they experienced in their past that we should acknowledge and love. Love them, of course, but not tie them to this somehow post-abortive woman or post-abortive man. It is our duty to love them and care for them and offer them healing. And my next point ties in with my last one, which is when we talk about post-abortion healing programs such as Project Rachel. We have healing after abortion. So that we're not labeling those women and men who have been part of this. Let's talk about the one topic that the title of this talk came from, which is pro-choice pro-abortion? And it's very interesting. I think the semantic gymnastics of pro-choice is very interesting. There was a 2010 NPR article that specifically answered the pro-choice, pro-life argument. And NPR took a firm stance in 2010 that they would continue to use the words pro-choice and pro-life. And then they go on later to list that other news stations would use pro-abortion and pro-life. But then later in the article, they talk about the fact that pro-life is actually a better word to use because the opposite is anti-life. And no one wants to be anti-life, do they? And for the so-called pro-choice movement to be anti-choice seems like a weird word to begin with, and it's less, damning, if you will, to be anti-choice versus anti-life. But that was 2010. Let's look at 2023. And we are being called in the news media anti-abortion, and the other side is just reproductive justice or reproductive health care. So what do we call ourselves and what do we call them? Well, I think it's really important that we use the word abortion when we talk about them. So pro-abortion is okay, but generally when you're talking to other people who agree with you, that's a fine terminology. But I try to use a lot of language that I'm going to use with people who are on the fence, that so-called mushy middle. And I just call them abortion advocates, because that's what they are. Or if they're the doctor themselves, and I use that term loosely, the abortionists themselves. I will rarely, if ever, call them doctors because they're doing absolutely no healing whatsoever. So what do we call ourselves? Right now, today, the word pro-life is incredibly strong. To be pro-life is incredibly important, and everybody knows what you mean when you say pro-life. Except when a reporter wants to talk to you. And this is so much fun, by the way. I love, by the way, reporters and the media, and they call and they say, hey, I've got 30 minutes. Can I come and swing by? And I say, absolutely. And then my wife is texting everybody on social media and everywhere, hey, Brian's going to be on the news on Channel 5. It's actually quite exciting, a lot of fun to represent the pro-life movement in the news media as well. But of course, they list us as being the anti-abortionist. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay to be against abortion. I don't know about you guys, but abortion is a terrible, horrible, heinous crime against humanity, and I'm okay with being against that. I mean, if we talk about slavery or segregation or any other problem with human history, I want to be against slavery. Wouldn't you agree? And I want to take it even a step further. And when our forefathers were fighting slavery, they called themselves abolitionists. And I'm okay to be an abortion abolitionist. Any of those phrases are just fine, but we cannot ever use the word pro-choice ever again. Nothing in that abortion facility offers choice. One of our clients recently, so we've had the privilege of not just doing 40 Days for Life. While I love bringing people out and asking people to come out to join us on the abortion facility's front lawn, we also run a pregnancy center here in town called Women's Care Connect. And recently we had a client of ours who came in and met with our staff. And she walked out that door learning that she had twins. She came in frustrated and concerned about her one pregnancy, learned about her 2 pregnancies, and was scared, but wanted to carry those children to term. And then she got a call from Planned Parenthood later that afternoon. They said, "You didn't show up for your appointment, and we can get you in tomorrow. We just happen to have an appointment open for you." She shows up at the abortion facility for a so-called information-only meeting. I don't know about you, but I don't know any pregnant woman who should go to an abortion facility for a so-called information-only meeting. And when she showed up, they told her inconveniently that, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we can't get you in for your abortion for another 6 to 8 weeks. But we just happen to have an appointment this afternoon." They proceeded to give her a so-called relaxing drug as she made her decision whether she wants to abort that day at that moment or wait 6 to 8 weeks. And sadly, with some semantic gymnastics and some cunning sales and marketing, they were able to convince this young lady to abort not just one, but 2 babies that day. That just less than 24 hours before, she was excited to carry this child, or these children, to term. So we should never use the word pro-choice. There's absolutely nothing happening with regards to choice inside an abortion facility. They are being pressured, they are being coerced into getting that abortion. We should also never use derogatory language that only us pro-lifers understand. For instance, we should never use the word abortion mill. And I know it's a very popular way to describe the abortion facility. And we should probably not use the terminology abortuary. While these are nice and clever, there are only some things that us pro-lifers really understand. And we certainly are not going to call it a clinic. Because as I said before, there's no healing that happens at these facilities. And as you've heard me say several times already this evening, we call them just simply facilities. Because the word facility doesn't have a negative or positive connotation to it. It just simply describes what it is. It's an abortion facility. Or an abortion business would be just fine as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit outside of the abortion semantics here and talk a little bit of just generally about pregnancy. And how would we talk about a pregnant mom or just a mom in general? Let's talk about adoption. Anyone ever said the word or ever heard the word giving your baby up? Anyone ever said that or heard that? Participation. I have some nodding here. Some people don't want to raise their hands. That's okay. You can nod. Giving your baby up. I don't know about you, but I have 6 children with our 7th in utero. And I could never, ever imagine giving up my children. Quite frankly, they're not even mine to begin with. They're God's children, and I have them on loan. And as my 14-year-old, almost 15-year-old, continues to prove to me that he keeps getting more and more and more independent. And in a few years, he'll be off to high school and college and maybe even be a priest of his own. We're only hoping, right? And I realize that they're just on loan, and we would never, quote, give them up because they're not ours to begin with. But to a woman who is considering abortion, we would absolutely never use the word giving up your child. And we should never use that language here amongst ourselves either. Less than 1% of women who are considering abortion ultimately choose adoption. Today, as I stand here before this podium, there are 2,000 to 3,000 couples who are ready and willing to adopt children today. At any given moment in time, there are qualified and loving parents and loving homes here in the United States at the numbers of 2,000 to 3,000. I've had a number of friends who were struggling with conceiving a child, and they started the adoption process. And 3 times they were matched with a woman and her baby, and 3 times they went through this entire process of helping her with her bills and helping her through her health care and advocating for her and helping her in so many different ways. And at the end, of course, she chose to parent. All 3 of them. And only on the 4th were they able to adopt that child. And when you think about adoption, what is really happening with regards to adoption? That woman has to make the most sacrificial choice of her entire life. So let's think about it for just a moment. The 3 different options if you're found in an unexpected pregnancy. Remember, we're not using the word crisis pregnancy. It's an unexpected pregnancy. She has 3 different choices that she has to choose from: parenting, adoption, and abortion. And if you think of the lives that will be lost because of this decision, there's actually 2 different lives at stake. There's the woman's life, likely not the actual physical life. She likely will not lose her physical life, but her emotional life she may lose. And so she's weighing her past life, the friends she used to have, and her reputation that she thinks it will bring her into something better, or her education, or whatever it might be. She has to give that life up for the sake of someone else. So in terms of abortion, she weighs the fact of her own psychological life against the life of the child, the physical life of the child. And many choose abortion because of that. Parenting is a whole other story because she gets to maybe lose her life, but at least she gets the new life of the child and gets a new life as a mother. Adoption is the hardest of all 3 of those. Because adoption, she has to choose to lose her own life, go through a pregnancy. Everyone gives her, all this scrutiny through her pregnancy. And then she loses the life of the child at the end. Because she has to, quote, give the baby up. And so we need to be very, very specific about our language when we talk about adoption, because she is not giving up her child, she is placing her child for adoption. And if she's not placing her child for adoption, she is in control because she is selecting other parents for her child. In fact, she gets an entire booklet full of all the different variety of parents that she could choose from who she could place her child for adoption. And of course, it's not like the old days. These are open adoptions where she gets ongoing updates on her child. But we as the pro-life movement should change our language quite a bit as we promote adoption. One, it shouldn't just be the throwaway. Well, why doesn't she just put her child up for adoption? Well, the reason she's not is because it's such a huge sacrifice for her. And we've served hundreds of women through our pregnancy center. Only 2 have chosen adoption. And only a handful are even interested. So what we must do is we must continue to support her throughout her own pregnancy and encourage her to carry her child to term, parent this child, and ultimately support her through that whole process. And of course, that gets us to a lot of single moms. And the single greatest predictor of poverty is, in fact, a fatherless home. A single mom at home with a child is the single greatest predictor of poverty. Not education, not a college degree, not a job, nothing. But on every chart, if you're a single mom, it's the biggest predictor of poverty. So let's talk about just a few last things here. And I'd really, really encourage you to ask any and all questions. We will have a microphone over here to ask your questions. But I wanted to address a couple of things about just big families. Or quite frankly, any mom who's out or parent out with their children. That expectant mother, she isn't expecting a child. She's with child or she's pregnant, but she's not expecting a child. She already has a child inside of her. Also, let's not call the child inside a mother's womb it. I recently went and, sorry, we had a laugh about this one. I recently went to the cake shop, to one of the grocery stores, and went to the back and picked out a cake. We now are expecting our 7th child, and my wife said, you know what, I'd like for it to be a surprise. And I thought, well, that's weird. The child's inside of you. How could it be a surprise? Like the screen's up there, everything else. And she says, well, I'll just close my eyes and look away. And on Valentine's Day, we went and had our 20-week ultrasound. And of course, the nurse, shows me on the screen. It's pretty obvious. And then she whispers to me later on the gender of the baby. I'm like, well, this is our 7th round. I think we get it at this point along. Thank you for reconfirming that. And so I take some of the older kids, and my wife goes home, and she has lots of things that she has to do to get through the day. And I go to the bakery, and I go to the back, and I say, do you ever write on your cakes? Can you write on your cake for me? And the woman says, sure, yeah, I can do that. And I said, can you write on there, she's a girl, right? And she's like, so what's the occasion? Is it a birthday party? Is it like a soccer game? I said, no, she's a girl. And she's confused, like, what? I get it, she's a girl. So you want it in pink. Is it a birthday party? How old is the girl? I said, no. It's a gender reveal. I'm going to surprise my wife tonight with a gender reveal. She's a girl. Of course, we had a little laugh about that, and of course I go home with the she's a girl, and of course there's little poppers. We have pink all over the place, and we're excited to welcome our little girl. But we have to realize the humanity of the child in front of us. The child is not an it. I mean, some people call me an it, right? Some people don't really like me, and that's fine. That's okay. But if we really want to be pro-life, we can use other language like they, although that's a controversial topic we'll talk in a moment about. Or just, how's baby doing? So is baby a girl or a boy? I know it takes a little bit more syllables and a little bit more thought to do that, but you will encourage those mothers who are very offended when you might call it an it, because it's not an it. I certainly wasn't when I was in my mother's womb. Let's go off on just a brief little topic, which is sweeping our nation right now. We don't even know what to do with. Something called gender-affirming care. I saw this pop up on Planned Parenthood's website, something called gender-affirming care. I asked all my coworkers and several other people several years ago, like, what the heck is this gender-affirming care? What is that? Well, really what it is it's genitalia mutilation or sterilization is what it is. It's child abuse is what it is. And I'm grateful that our politicians have realized this. That remember that Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood's goal is to exterminate the Negro population. And that transgenderism, or quote, gender-affirming care, is just as good as abortion for them. Because if they could convince the entire population that they no longer should have children, especially those who are minorities, that at that moment they would still achieve the same goal. And we wonder why somehow this Planned Parenthood is all about this LGBT stuff. Because it goes at exactly the same goal. To reduce the population, especially in minorities. And to destroy our families. One last one, we have a lot of fun with this one. Of course, we're quite the show when we walk into the supermarket with 6 children. And on a regular basis, we get the terminology, "Wow, you've got your hands full." And we appreciate their excitement about our 6 children. And of course, with my wife pregnant, it makes it even more exciting. But this does not help that mother become more excited about her 6 children, or any child, for that matter. We even get, "Do you know what causes that?" And every once in a while, my wife gets a little excited, and she's like, "Have you ever seen my husband?" Right? I like it when she tells me those types of stories. Instead, we should celebrate life. When you see any young parent, or any parent at all with children in the supermarket, or anywhere throughout our entire community, encourage them. Tell them that they have beautiful children. Tell them that you dress them so cute today. Tell them things that encourage them. Especially that mom who's struggling with a kid laying on the ground with their arms and hands flailing underneath them or above them. That's the mom you encourage. That's the mom that you offer that helping hand. And I'll end with this. And of course, we have plenty of time to answer some questions. We've talked a lot about abortion, and we've talked a lot about moms and women. But really, at the end of the day, it comes down to fathers. The greatest predictor of poverty is single moms. And while I run a pregnancy center here in town, and we have people all across Illinois who are talking to these women going into these abortion facilities, they feel so alone. We must support fathers and husbands. We have 75 pregnancy centers in the state of Missouri, in which I run one of them. And I am pained by the fact that we turn out hundreds of single moms per year. I don't know the solution. Every time I talk about this, my staff say, "Wait a second, we're here to end abortion, not change the entire culture." That we're there for that crisis moment. But my heart is pained because I know that at the root of this is the breakdown of the family and the fact that fathers are illustrated on every television show. Everything you can possibly think of is that fathers stumble all over themselves and do stupid things and make mistakes all the time. That is the story that we tell our culture about fathers. And that I'm here today to stand with any other father who wants to continue to be the very best husband and very best father you possibly can be. But it's not an easy job. But we have the most important job to support our wives and to support our children. You go all the way back to Genesis and you look at Adam and Eve. And you think about Adam and Eve and you think about, well, maybe we could just blame Eve because she was the one who talked to the serpent. And she was the one who pulled the fruit and then gave it to Adam. We could just point the finger at her and say it was her fault. But if you look a few lines earlier, God gave Adam the dominion over all of the beasts of the world, all the plants, and also over his wife, Eve. He said that you must protect her and guide her. Well, maybe not in Genesis, but later on, right? And that he was to look after her. And he was standing there right with Eve. So as men, we must be there for our wives and for our children. And to that, I encourage every single one of you, and thank you.
Okay, I guess it works.
It works.
Anybody got a question besides me? I only got 10. Okay, I'll start with my first question.
Go ahead.
There's between 5,000 and 9,000 women who go out of state from Missouri for abortion.
Yeah.
How many do pregnancy resource centers rescue in-state? Any idea? I would have guesstimated at least 1,000, but maybe it's more. Hopefully more.
So, really good question. So, how many specifically are, quote, rescued in-state? It really depends on the pregnancy center and how many clients they're serving. So, we serve about 700 clients at our pregnancy center every single year. Only about half of them are pregnant. And I say that in the sense that they come in for a pregnancy test and it's negative. Right? So that's about 350 clients that we see, and of those, nearly all of them are going to be high risk. And so of those, 50% of the high risk clients are going to choose life through our pregnancy center. So that puts the number roughly about 175 of pregnant women who walk into our door who are high risk. So if we're a 1 of 75, do the math there, is that... I'm sorry? So we categorize clients in 3 different categories: high risk, medium, or low risk. Of abortion. So they're at risk to abortion. So a high risk client, and again, we run all of our Google advertising specifically for high risk clients. Now, a lot of other pregnancy centers, you'll hear statistics about, well, we save 99% of all the clients who walk in the door. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the clients walking in the door are medium or low risk clients because they do broad advertising, and the broad advertising gets them clients who are low income, just looking for free stuff, those kind of things. Our advertising is very, very specific for a woman who is looking to schedule an abortion today. And so those clients who come in who want an abortion today, those are clients who are high risk. Immediate. Yeah. So a medium risk client would be one who is being pressured from a loved one, a parent or someone else, or someone who is low income. And then a low risk is someone who is just looking for some free stuff. So, but I didn't answer your question because I don't know the full breadth of the work of the state of Missouri.
Well, that would lead me to my second question. What kind of network is there between pregnancy resource centers across the state?
So his question is about networks around the entire state. So really it comes down to more about the national networks versus the local, which we do have a local network as well. So throughout those 75 pregnancy centers, I'd say about half of them are part of an alliance network here in the state of Missouri, but there's also two other networks that are really important, which is CareNet and also Heartbeat International. These have been around since Roe versus Wade began, and so those networks continue to support the pregnancy centers. There's also a legal network called NIFLA, and NIFLA supports all of the pregnancy centers as well. So they provide a lot of the training and legal defense for the pregnancy centers.
Next, Walking with Moms is part of the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops program. I guess it got derailed during the pandemic, but it's being pushed now. And Knights of Columbus are joining with the ASAP program to support pregnancy resource centers. Are you getting many referrals from them?
So the answer is I don't know. So in a sense, we get referrals mostly from two different places, which is our sidewalk counselors outside of these abortion facilities. So we're literally turning these women around who are going in, and also our very specific Google advertising that brings in probably about 12 to 15 brand new, highly abortion-minded clients each week. And so we get most of our clients from there. We're not necessarily tracking our clients from that initiative. If you like, we can, and maybe I'll make a note on that.
The Coalition Life has such a great reputation for sidewalk counseling that you've expanded to Fairview Heights, and you expanded to Flossmoor. Now you're expanding to Carbondale. You want to give us a little update on those challenges? Yeah,
thank you. I mean, we're talking specifically about language this evening, but of course our ministry, we have 36 staff members. I never really would have realized 11 years ago that I would have staff members at the number of 36. But most of these are either in our pregnancy center or they are out on the streets actually talking to the women going into these abortion facilities. So Fairview Heights is right across the river, as you guys might be aware. Flossmoor is up in the Chicago region. We have a team up there in the suburbs of Chicago, and then we have a team down in Carbondale. Now, what you guys might not know is that Carbondale, the home of one of the universities down there, also is the home of an Amtrak station and a bus stop. So those three items combined, plus a very favorable city council in Carbondale, is now inviting all of these different women from Missouri, from Tennessee, from Kentucky, Indiana, and as far as even Texas, to go to Carbondale, Illinois. They now have, they never had any abortion facilities until a few months ago. They now have 2 abortion facilities, one from Texas and one from Tennessee. One called Alamo, the other called Choices, of course. And of course, Planned Parenthood is building a 14,000 square foot abortion facility in Carbondale as we speak. Today, they hope to open that first quarter of this year. They want to take the Choices location. They alone last year took 2,400 lives through abortion last year. They, of course, were shut down after the Dobbs decision, and so they hope to transport all of the Tennessee abortions to Carbondale. And then the Alamo wants to move all of the Texas ones. And of course, Planned Parenthood wants to take all of the Missouri clients from Cape Girardeau and southern Missouri and send them to Carbondale as well. So that's a real big crisis down in Carbondale. We had several initiatives about the Carbondale crisis, and we are right now ramping up very, very quickly to address the Carbondale crisis.
So your organization must be strapped for people and money. Are there volunteer opportunities for people like me?
Yeah, so because of a lot of the things that were happening, specifically in Carbondale, the Dobbs decision, other things, we've actually taken a campaign off for 40 Days for Life. It's very unprecedented. We've been doing 40 Days for Life for 14 years, and we decided that we would take this campaign off because of all of the issues and problems in Carbondale. So I would still encourage you, continue the 40 Days for Life campaign. I'm pretty sure you guys have a day. There's a volunteer group that's pulling that together over in Fairview Heights, and we appreciate the effort that they're doing there. Beyond that, I mean, everything that you could think of that you would generally have in an office environment, we need help with. So from accounting to phone calling to stuffing envelopes to running the copier to literally vacuuming and dusting, all of those variety of things we need help with as a volunteer. And then also, it's an interesting world we live in. There's even work from home volunteer opportunities as well. So you're welcome to call our office. I'm sure he has plenty of our information on that. And then, of course, coming out and joining us on the sidewalk. We always need sidewalk counselors. And if you don't want to be a sidewalk counselor, you can support us on the sidewalk as a prayer volunteer or a statistician. So we have a little tablet out there where we take all the stats of how many people are going in, how many people are going out, and that tells us how well we're doing that day, and then we can continue to retrain our staff based on their statistics. It's interesting, nowhere else in the country do we know exactly the statistics of these abortion facilities. No one else spent, not that I'm not patting myself on the back here, it's just a matter of we know exactly how many people are going in and out of these abortion facilities, and we know exactly how effective we are. We get about a 1% turnaround rate every single day on average. So that's people going in, people coming out, whether they're the abortionists, whether they're a random variety of people, or the UPS driver or the Uber driver. Every single person we talk to, about 1 out of 100, we're able to turn around and get them over to a nearby pregnancy center. This is an ongoing statistic that keeps on, little by little, incrementally getting better as we continue to train and retrain our staff. That's not your question, but that was an added bonus for you.
Okay. The Mosaic van over there in Fairview Heights, they have the ultrasounds. Do they get much business? And I don't know, sometimes I think they're tucked away so that they're not as visible as it would like them to be, but how do you guys work with them?
Yeah, so Mosaic Pregnancy Center is similar to the pregnancy centers you might know and trust here in Missouri. So Mosaic provides pregnancy testing, ultrasounds, and also STD testing. And we actually were able to work with them immediately when that abortion facility in Fairview Heights opened up. We already had a relationship with them, with some of the clients we were working with in Illinois. Kathy Lesnoff runs that pregnancy help center. She actually used to work as a nurse, and she has a great conversion story. She used to work as a nurse at the Granite City so-called Hope abortion facility. And she had a great conversion, found Christ, and founded the pregnancy center over there. It's long. The story is way too long to tell, but God just intervened, and we now have an office we call our community center right next door to Planned Parenthood. And it was a crazy course of events. Maybe another time I can tell that story. But that includes parking for the Mosaic ultrasound van right next to the fence there in Fairview Heights, including parking for the women who we might turn around. So on average, so we look at the month of January, and we sent 50 women away from these abortion facilities in the month of January. The year prior, we sent 15. So there's two things happening there. One, the traffic flow from other states has dramatically increased in the state of Illinois. And two, we've just gotten better. We are retraining our staff every single day. And so that's kind of our average of how many we're getting in a month. It's about 50 now.
Tell you a little story about Brian. We were going to this, That Man Is You, and one day, it was early in the morning at Incarnate Word. His family belongs to Incarnate Word Parish. And so anyway, we're sitting next to each other, and he said, what's new? And I said, well, My wife's niece up in Lincoln County has a problem pregnancy, and they want her to abort, but she's not going to, and her name is Mila Grace. They named the baby in the womb. And so Brian said, I'll pray for her. And so about 3 or 4 months later, we're back there and we're sitting next to each other, and the first thing out of Brian's mouth is, how's Mila Grace? Well, unfortunately, Mila Grace was born and lived about 7 months, but they had a big reception at the funeral at the Knights of Columbus Hall across the street from St. Alphonsus Millwood. And there was like 500 people showed up for the wake. I mean, it was incredible. So it reminded me of when I first came to this parish, Monsignor Pins, he had a book called Clowns of God. And it talked about God's perspective of things. And so one Sunday, and he put in the bulletin that, behold the Down syndrome child, this is God talking, his sins against me are not as foul as those of you so-called normal people. I will use the Down syndrome child to draw you closer to me. And Mila Grace, he used Mila Grace to draw hundreds of people closer to him. This morning, sitting right there at Mass, there was a mentally challenged young man, nice looking young man, and Father Molini's given a sermon about be perfect like your Father in heaven is perfect. And so he jokingly said, now how many of you people are perfect? And the young man raised his hand.
Of course.
His mother quickly gets him to put it down, but I was like, he might be the only one in the room that was. Because later, he grabs his mother's hand and gives her a squeeze, and he kisses her on the shoulder. And he was very attentive and loving to his mother. And he was a wonderful example for me. So that's just a few tidbits from old man Ted.
Well, thank you, Ted. Any other questions besides Ted? We don't want to have him monopolize. Ted, could you just, if you can walk around, I think if we had a larger group, maybe that would be necessary, but I think this gentleman was first in the back here, and we'll come to you. This gentleman in the black.
Are there any abortions taking place in Missouri right now?
To the best of our knowledge, no. So prior to the Dobbs decision, we actually did a phenomenal job in the state of Missouri. There were less than 100 that were happening every single year, even before the Dobbs decision. So to the best of our knowledge, there are no abortions happening in the state of Missouri. The only time that might happen is a so-called life of the mother or in serious emergency risk. But we are not aware of any reason that you would have an abortion because of serious risk. Now, so that might happen in the emergency room, but likely they would categorize that as something different. And they, for instance, in an ectopic pregnancy, you would remove the fallopian tube. You wouldn't do a, quote, abortion. You'd do something else. It's called something else. Now, what might be happening, and sadly, are undocumented abortions might be happening in Missouri or Texas or anywhere else, because there are currently about 85 websites that are out-of-the-country websites that you can order abortion pills and have them delivered directly to your house. So again, this is out of the country, and so the regulation on this is just non-existent right now, even though there are laws on the book that say that you cannot mail abortion drugs into the United States, and you can't mail them into specifically Missouri. So those laws are on the book, so there might be some illegal, quote, back alley abortions happening, but this is at the encouragement of the abortion industry.
This is going to be offside.
That's okay, I like these types of things.
Do you still think that the Planned Parenthood still has the same mission statement as Margaret Sanger? I mean, to exterminate the minority populations. And second, have you considered that politicians are seeing abortions as a solution for limited resources?
Sure. So the first question is, do I believe that Planned Parenthood has the same mission statement as Margaret Sanger did, which was to exterminate the Negro population, as in her words, not mine? And so really I think it's even deeper than the black or racist or whatever type of population. Is even deeper. It's actually a more satanic problem than it is anything else. So we see this right now in New Mexico, that right now the Satanic Temple is opening an abortion facility named after a Supreme Court justice. I think it's Justice Thomas. They're naming their abortion facility after this guy. Because they understand that this is not necessarily about race. It's about supporting the evil one, right? Right now, the Satanic Temple is suing the state of Missouri because they believe that this is a religious exercise to have an abortion. And so everything has satanic roots with regards to abortion. And so they're just shouting, they're covering it in this so-called reproductive justice, but when in reality, it's just about doing evil. And I hope that answers your question. And so what was your second question? I apologize.
You would answer my question. I was just curious because you mentioned that at the beginning, which is a horrible beginning, obviously. The second question is, so this, I think this is part of the reason why the politicians are supporting abortion, even if they're kind of on the fence, is that they see it as a solution to limited resources.
Sure.
And so I was wondering what you would do about that to kind of change their minds as well. I mean, obviously the grassroots works best, but
Right.
I'd say hit all its facets, right?
Sure. So here's the interesting thing about the so-called limited resources. In the United States today, the replacement rate for the United States is at 1.64. Europe is even worse. It's actually down at 1.3. So what that means is that for every woman of childbearing years, how many children is she having? To sustain a society, you must have 2.1 children for every childbearing aged woman that you have, or 2.1 children for every child, or for every woman. We are well below replacement rate. And so all of the things that we're hearing with regards to employment, I mean, minimum wage is a joke right now, quite frankly. If you remember about 2 years ago, you had protests and people up and down, or prior to COVID, they were all screaming and yelling that they needed $15 an hour. And here we are 2-3 years later after COVID, and a lot of my parents' generation have decided to retire for a lot of really good reasons. And because of this great retirement that's happening, we now have a huge vacuum of where we need people to fulfill these jobs. We cannot continue to grow our population and grow our society and continue to pass this on to our children if we don't repopulate. And in fact, the Democrats and or those pro-abortion politicians, sadly, there's few and far between pro-life Democrats. There used to be, but not as many as before. But one of the head pro-abortion politicians, Chuck Schumer, admitted on television, he said that we are not, quote, repopulating ourselves, as he gestures to his stomach. And he says the solution to this is immigration and illegal immigration. We just need to invite everybody in. And unfortunately, that just replaces the culture that we love so dearly instead of actually replacing it with our children. So we are actually in a huge crisis. In fact, a lot of statisticians right now today, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but a lot of these statisticians are looking at 2023 as being a Great Depression because of two things. One, because of our debt, and two, because of the demographics. And the demographics we just literally cannot change. unless we have this great, population boom, baby boom. But of course, we're telling all our children, don't get married until you're 40. And of course, once you're 40, it's a lot more difficult to get pregnant at that point. Sorry, that was a long answer. But no, there is no problem with resources. The only resource problem we have is fresh water.
I know there's no problem with resources, but I can see how it gets twisted in people's minds.
Yeah, absolutely. It gets twisted because we were told this for many, many years, even before I was born. And here we are. The results of it is that now China, just look at China today. There's millions of men who are looking for wives, and there are none to be had. They're importing women from other countries because they just simply can't find women, because they aborted all their women along the way. So, I'm sorry, who is next? Yeah. Go ahead, sir. Did you have the microphone?
Yes, the new ruling of footage away from the facility, the Planned Parenthood facility, changed from what it was to what it is today. What is that footage that when we're praying away from the clinic, and how is that enforced?
Yeah, so you might be referencing a bubble or buffer zone. Is that what you're referencing? Okay. So in the city of St. Louis, many years back, and Ted, if you could move a little, the young lady, I can't see there. I apologize, Ted. So in the city of St. Louis, they attempted to pass what's called a buffer zone. And a buffer zone is when you put a line on the ground and you literally paint a line there and no one can walk in. And by the grace of God and some great lobbying behind the scenes and some great individuals I know and love, we were able to defeat the buffer zone in the city of St. Louis. So that never existed, even though we were fighting it so hard. In Fairview Heights, just right across the river, there is no such buffer or bubble zone in Fairview Heights. Now in Carbondale, just a few weeks ago, they passed something called a bubble zone, 2 hours south, 2.5 hours south of here in Carbondale. A bubble zone is very, very difficult for a police officer to enforce. Basically what it is 100 feet away from the door of the abortion facility is the bubble zone. But as you walk around, it's an 8 feet bubble around you inside that 100-foot zone. So already everyone in the audience today is confused, right? So are the police officers, and so are the judges, and so is everybody else about this. So the 8-foot bubble around you can't approach anyone with leaflets or literature or approach them to educate them. Although I could approach that person to yell at them, but I can't approach them to educate them. This is where it's completely and utterly unconstitutional because it's about the content that you're trying to deliver and has nothing to do with the fact that you're trying to protect this person. That bubble zone is in place in the city of Carbondale, and we have a lot of plans for that bubble zone. Other questions? Did you have a question up here in the front, or no? Did you have? Okay. The gentleman in the back. I'm having fun. I don't know about you guys. Bernadette's having fun. I still don't know how those magnet things stick together, and then you turn around, they stick together. Normally magnets repel, but that's okay. Yes, sir.
We certainly have our concept or our belief in terms of the morals that life begins at conception.
Correct.
We have some other people of faith. In fact, we have some religious leaders who have recently filed suit because they have a different perception. I wonder if you can comment on that lawsuit and other people of faith, religious leaders who have filed suit because they believe that that contradicts their freedom of religion as it relates to pro-life and abortion.
Absolutely, great question. So this was maybe a week or two ago. another opportunity to get on the news. But right now, and I've talked to many in the Attorney General's office and others, their lawsuit is going nowhere. There is no religious right to abortion. And so, in a sense, it was just a media stunt. Let's be really clear on that one. But on the other side of the coin, to answer your other question, what about those faiths that believe that life begins at another point, right? They get a soul, which the pro-abortion movement or the abortion industry forever has said that this is about science and a decision between a woman and her doctor. They've never said that this is somehow a religious argument that when a life gets a soul, okay? And so they've always said that when does life begin? It begins at the moment of viability. And when they went to the Dobbs decision, they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court justices asked the attorneys, they said, so is there some other line besides viability that is an okay line, that maybe it's 10 weeks, maybe it's some other point? You know, the thing is, it's been 50 years, and they still can't define what, quote, viability is. And so they had no rebuttal. It was either abortion at 9 months of all pregnancy, or we have no alternative. There's nothing in between. So anything that these other faiths might say that, oh, well, you don't get a soul here, you don't get, really, those faiths are promoting evil. They're not promoting the Jesus Christ that I believe in. Is that a fair answer? Any other questions? And the other? Oh, she's got a question.
I really liked your comment about the fathers need to be, but you know, so many of these pregnancies, there is no father there.
Agreed.
They abandon the mom and the child, and I can, understand a woman who has the shudders about going through that by herself, and especially a 15-year-old who doesn't even have the support of her parents.
Right.
But where are the guys?
Oh. Well, I have exactly the same question you do, which is, where are the dads? I heard a story once of a young man who was approached by by a sidewalk counselor. He was not one of ours, but he approached this young man. He was getting into his car. He just walked his girlfriend into the abortion facility. And one of the sidewalk counselors approached him and asked him, hey, what are you doing? And he says, well, I just had to take her in for an abortion. And he explained to this sidewalk counselor that it was his 15th abortion that he had to take this woman to. And he says, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? You don't need to keep doing this and keep impregnating these women and then taking these to the abortion facility. And his response was, well, I'm just a dog. I'm just an animal doing what animals do. And he was quite ashamed of himself, but he felt like he had no control over his animal instincts, if you will. And I see this as our underlying problem of our entire society, is the fact that we have fatherless homes. So where are the dads? I mean, many of them are in our funeral or in our cemeteries. One of my employees, her husband's cousin recently was shot and killed. This is what happens in these homes, is that when we hear about the crime and the murders and all of these problems and drugs and alcohol, they're either in our prisons or in our cemeteries. That's where these men are. And if they're not, they're in gangs, and they're just not, hanging around because of that. Now, on the other side of the coin, let's say that they're not a terrible, horrible person. Well, guess what? They're probably working their tails off just trying to make $1 and somehow just trying to do their best. The problem is the so-called feminist movement has been hijacked by the abortion industry, and now men are being told that to sit down, shut up, you don't have to open our doors, you don't have to be a hero for us, we're going to be just like you, we're going to be men. We're even going to change our gender to become men. So it's interesting, men, especially white men, are the enemy of the state. They can't do anything right, and they can't stand up for anything, and they certainly can't stand up for women who, especially about abortion. And so we've been demonized for many, many decades now, and so as a result, we don't really want to deal with it anymore, just generally as a gender. And so as a result, we get fatherless homes. And then, and then in addition to that, sorry, it's a very complicated issue. In addition to that is our laws actually encourage fatherless homes. Because a woman who is married will get less benefits than a single mother will. And so he hangs around just for the benefits, and he knows when the check shows up from Social Security. And so he, cashes in on those checks, but he's not going to stick around to actually help the child or the mother.
The other thing that I wanted to comment on too is that I think sometimes the Catholic Church is missing the boat. The horse has already gotten out of the corral by the time the woman is pregnant. Why aren't we working more with youth and teaching them how important they are, that they are temples of God, that they are children of God, that they are valuable and important, and that what they show on TV is not what the real world's about. I mean, it's getting to that, but that's not what you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be like a dog. You're not supposed,
Exactly.
and teach them the value of a female and a male, that, they're special, you're all special, and there's somebody out there special waiting for you. I know we used to do something like that in PSR here, and I don't know if it's still going on, but I would hope that that kind of programming would help the youth grow up with
Right.
the idea that we don't have to do this.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I would encourage each of you, and it is not politically correct for me to say this, so everybody's ready for what I'm about to say, right? I would call the Archdiocese today and ask them where the Right Start program is. The Right Start program is a phenomenal program, promoted and performed by mostly volunteers. So it costs the Archdiocese almost $0 to promote this program called the Right Start program, and about a year or two they removed it. And this Right Start program educated our junior high students in all of the Catholic schools here in the Archdiocese, and educated them on what abortion is, and about sexuality, and all of the things that generally are very difficult to teach. And so that program was removed with little to no explanation. I would encourage you to bring that program back where it used to be. And second of all, we saw as well in our public schools, one of the things, so we homeschool our children. One of the things we've done is, we were just at a G.K. Chesterton event last night, and G.K. Chesterton was quoted from 1910 as saying that we have given up our responsibility as educating our children, and we've given it back to the state. The most dangerous thing we can do is allow the state to educate our children. Now, of course, my wife and I, we both grew up in public education, but it was quoted last night that, in fact, the education that we are giving our children in Catholic schools or any kind of private schools just imitates what's happening in public schools. But instead of giving them a really, truly Catholic education and teaching our Catholic values first, and then all of the other things secondary. Instead, it's upside down and backwards. We remove programs like Right Start and only teach some of these core things that they could get at any other public school. I don't have an answer or a solution to that except call the Archdiocese and ask them about where the Right Start program is. And I think this gentleman over here has a question.
For me, one of the biggest disappointments is, I think, it's a commentary on Catholics in general, is that approximately what I've heard, I don't know how true that statistic is, but about 50% of Catholics believe that abortion's okay. So again, getting back to family and that, so if that's true, obviously they're teaching their children that, and also from the churches, you know, there's the politicians, Biden, Pelosi, and there's, you know, mixed, you know, interpretations by the priests and bishops and cardinals about, no, they shouldn't receive the body of Christ. Oh, it's okay if they do. And so that creates a lot of confusion within Catholics. I guess it's okay because, you know, Biden gets communion and it appears it's not a problem.
Sure. Great question. I don't know the exact number. I think a lot of surveys say that we as Catholics, about 50% of us generally don't even believe that the Eucharist is even the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. And so if we don't believe the underlying fundamental part of our Catholic faith, how are we going to believe any of the other variety of teachings of the Catholic faith? My guess is those people who call themselves, quote, pro-choice, and also call themselves Catholic, also generally don't believe that the Eucharist is Jesus. So, ma'am, if you have a question, you can ask a question. I'd be glad to answer your question. Ma'am, I'd be glad to answer your question. If you have a question, I'd be glad to answer it. So I think as Catholics, what we find is that unfortunately, and you guys, because you're sitting here today, you guys understand, just as I do and my wife does, that our faith is being watered down little by little, little by little. Father Pullman back here understands this as well, and I'm so grateful that you at Ascension have Father Pullman and all the great other priests that you have here at this parish. It's really, really important. But we see a huge opportunity to be able to continue the Catholic faith through the pro-life movement, because guess what? For the most part, the Catholics are the ones who continue this throughout this entire time. So with this, I think we're about done. And so, Ted, any last comments?
Yeah, well, I'd like to thank you, Brian, for coming and telling us all this stuff. Very succinct and to the point, and it's a very complicated subject, and it covers a lot of points, but thank you for your 15 years of dedicated work and 7 kids. My daughter's got 6, so you went past her. She homeschools too, and she has the same thoughts you have. There are, on the back table, there's literature if anybody needs anything, and a few of us will be around if you have any more questions or you want some guidance about what's going on in the parish. And with that, thank Father Pullman for setting this up with, anyway, that's it. So thank you, Brian.
All right. Thank you.